Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is Monday, the 17th of December, 2018, the 9th of Tevet, 5779. Thanks so much for joining us here. If you want to get in touch with me during the week, Josh at thelandofisrael.com, on Facebook, Joshua Hasten, and on Twitter at Josh Hasten. My guest just after the break on the show this week is the one and only Caroline Glick, senior contributing editor at the Jerusalem Post and at Ma'ariv as well, and for Breitbart. We're going to be talking to Caroline about everything going on here in the news, especially in regard to the latest wave of jihadist terror wreaking havoc on our country. 2 soldiers killed last week at the Givat HaAsaf neighborhood just outside of Bethel, and then several days before that, jihadists again in a shooting attack just outside of Ofra. 9 people injured, including a pregnant woman who was forced to deliver her baby as a result, and the baby subsequently died. The baby was murdered. Let's call it what it is. So we'll be speaking to Caroline about what Israel should be doing in light of the recent wave of terror attacks, and it's not just the shooting attacks. This morning there were several attacks already. Attacks on the roads, stoning attacks over the last couple of days, and the army is inside of the various Arab villages looking for the suspects, looking for the perpetrators of these attacks. The Jerusalem Post reports that clashes broke out between the IDF and Arabs in multiple locations on Friday during what was called a day of rage. They've had, basically every day is a day of rage. Here, this one was a special day of rage. Of course, they murder us. Israel responds, kills the terrorists, and they try to make us look like the bad guys. And a lot of the world media, unfortunately, goes along with that narrative. Again, on Friday, hundreds attend the funerals of 2 of the soldiers killed in the attack there at Givat HaAsaf. Staff Sergeant Yuval Mor Yosef, 20 years old, was buried in his hometown of Ashkelon, while Sergeant Yosef Cohen, 19, from Beit Shemesh, was buried at the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. There are others who still need your prayers, others who were injured in the attacks. I know there's one soldier who is remains in very, very serious condition, and others who are injured. You can go to my Facebook page and scroll down just a little bit to see the most updated list of those Israelis, civilian soldiers who are in need of your prayers. Hamas, reported here by the Jerusalem Post, in this day of rage, and basically every day, as I mentioned, using social media to encourage an explosion of violence in what they call the West Bank and Judea and Samaria. So they're using social media. They're calling for violence. My question to our government, the Israeli government, is if we know that they're using social media, why allow them to have internet? Why not shut down the Hamas access to internet? Shut down the internet in Gaza. That would be a first step in this war against the jihadist terror. We've talked on the show before about shutting down the electricity, and I believe that should happen as well. But number one, shut down the internet. We could talk about the need to take out Hamas leaders. Many things we should be doing, not just these home demolitions. And we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. On Friday night, reported by the J-Post, IDF troops carried out operational activity in Hebron, stopping a vehicle for inspection, finding an M16 assault rifle and an Uzi submachine gun. This is serious, folks. This is serious. It's bad enough with the rocks. It's bad enough with the rocket attacks in the south. When they start pulling out guns and shooting, that is when it gets really, really bad. And we have to be strong. We have to take out the bad guys. We have to take out their leaders. And we'll talk about it with Caroline later on. I believe we have to expel the families of the terrorists. There are many things that we should be doing, not just raising a home or part of a home, which is a potential deterrence. But again, when it takes months and months and then you only take down a room or whatnot, I think that's ridiculous. I don't think that's anywhere near enough. So here's just an example. The IDF demolished the home, also reported by the J Post, of Islam Yosef Abu Hamed, 32 years old, charged in the killing of IDF Staff Sergeant Ronen Lubarsky during a raid in May. This was the Duvdevan elite unit soldier who had a concrete slab thrown on his head, a 20-kilogram marble slab from a rooftop. So the home of that terrorist has been demolished. Mahmoud Abbas, of course, here, as reported by Israel National News, calling for his home to be rebuilt automatically, immediately being rebuilt. I mean, these guys are, nothing has changed. Mahmoud Abbas, Fatah, Hamas, there are small differences there, but their incitement, their calls for the destruction of Israel, their support of terror, referring to these people who murder and shoot pregnant women as martyrs, none of this has gone away. This is all still relevant. It's all happening. It's all here. They haven't changed. They're not going to change. Giving them a state won't create any type of change. We have to be tough. This is the Middle East. This isn't the U.S.-Canadian border. Things have to change more than just home demolitions. Listen to this. So that terrorist whose home was razed the other day, his mother, 73-year-old Nasser, told reporters she was sacrificing her home for the sake of Palestine and its people. She said, "We won't collapse, we won't surrender." She's a mother who has 6 sons in Israeli prison. The 7th son was killed by the IDF. All were convicted of terror attacks. So she has 7 sons, all terrorists. Every one of them. 1 killed, 6 arrested. She is saying, "I'll sacrifice my house for the cause." Why is her family still in Israel? Why is she still living in a village in Yehuda v'Shomron? She has 7 terrorist sons. 7. Not 1, not 2, not 3. 7 evil children. And she herself is evil. And she and her family should be sent out of the country. Again, we'll bring it up with Caroline just a little bit later, as the government is trying to advance legislation which would actually call for the eviction of families of terrorists. We'll see how long that takes to actually become a law, how long that takes to actually be a reality here. We're talking about the home demolitions. Even though I don't believe it's a true deterrent, the Jewish press reports that only 16 homes, with all this talk, only 16 homes have been demolished since 2015. With 77 Israelis killed in terror attacks during that period. That, according to the Jewish press, would seem pretty low. And then you have all these partial demolitions of homes, as I just talked about. But only 16 homes have been taken down, and the terror still continues. I say, try something else. In fact, the IDF spokesperson announced, this also in the reported by the Jewish press, announced on Sunday morning that the home, or at least part of the home, the terrorist who murdered my friend Ari Fold, Hashem Yikam Damo, will be taken down. There's still room for appeal. We don't know if it's going to happen, when it's going to happen. The order has been given, but we'll see if it actually is carried out. Again, we're talking about several months after the fact. I think it's a huge mistake to wait this long. Australia recognizes just West Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel. What do you think of this? I mean, I think this is a mistake. On one hand, you appreciate Australia recognizing any part of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, nevertheless, and a lot of MKs also were, the word here is tepid, used by the J Post in the announcement by Australia, because it's a united city. So why only recognize half of Jerusalem? Let's recognize all of Jerusalem like the United States did as the capital of the state of Israel. Of course, the Arab world going crazy over this recognition. Even though, listen, if they really believed that, if they really wanted a split city and they only wanted East Jerusalem as the capital, why would they care if Australia recognizes West Jerusalem? Doesn't make sense to me. Nevertheless, I don't think Australia went far enough. I think that they should have recognized all of Jerusalem as our capital because it has been for 3,000 years. In other news, the IDF uncovers a fourth Hezbollah tunnel violating Israeli sovereignty. Our friend Anna Aronheim from the Jerusalem Post reported the IDF announced Sunday the discovery of a fourth cross-border Hezbollah tunnel, which infiltrated into northern Israel from Lebanon over the weekend. Like the other tunnels discovered, it is under control of the Israeli military, has been filled with explosives ahead of its neutralization. Anyone who enters it from the Lebanese side endangers their life, the army said. The Lebanese government is responsible for digging in the tunnels from Lebanese territory. This is a serious violation of Israeli sovereignty. Again, the IDF launched Operation Northern Shield last week in order to detect these tunnels. They believe that there are many, many more along the border, but the operation continues. It says here it will take weeks or months to complete. That is just in a nutshell the news here from Israel. Again, a very difficult week, and since I've been doing radio now for over 10 years, there have been many, many difficult shows, many difficult weeks when we've come on the air and had, unfortunately, to talk about terrorism and these young IDF soldiers giving their lives for the safety and the defense of the state of Israel. Remember, this is a people's army. These are children of our neighbors and of our friends. And you can't go, there's no such thing as even 4 degrees of separation. It's usually only 1 or 2, because everyone knows somebody who knows these soldiers, and it happens each and every time because it's such a small country. So we extend our condolences to those murdered, and we pray for a speedy recovery for all the victims who still remain in hospitals as a result of the various terror attacks over the last week. We'll take a short break right now. I'll come back with the one and only Caroline Glick. My name is Josh Hasten. This is Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. Get in touch with me, Josh, at thelandofisrael.com. On Twitter, it's at Josh Hasten. Facebook, Joshua Hasten. Short break, and we'll come back with Caroline Glick.
Torah thoughts and inspiration from the heartland of Israel. Tune in every week to The Soul of Israel with Rabbi Shlomo Katz on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
And we are back. Josh Hasten here. Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is Monday, December 17th, 2018. The 9th of Tevet, 5779. Don't forget, you can always get in touch with me during the week. Josh at thelandofisrael.com, on Facebook, Joshua Hasten, and on Twitter at Josh Hasten. It is truly an honor to have my next guest on the program. She's been on numerous times over the years. The one and only Caroline Glick, senior contributing editor for the Jerusalem Post, Ma'ariv, and now Breitbart as well. Caroline, thanks so much for joining me here on the show.
Thanks for having me on again, Josh. It's great to be with you.
So we've been talking about everything going on here in Israel in the first half of the show, terrorism and Israel's response. I want to know from you, at this juncture, how do you think Israel should be responding to this, if you want to call it a new wave of terror? You and I know very well, unfortunately, that this has actually been going on for over 100 years, jihadist terror against the Jews here in the land of Israel. But this latest wave the last week, the attack in Ofra, the deadly attack in Givat HaSaf, what should Israel be doing at this juncture to respond?
Well, I mean, I think right now we're just dealing with it on a tactical level. I think that's important, but not enough, reinforcing the number of troops, going, through and doing arrests and trying to take care of some of the belated house demolitions that have been blocked by the Supreme Court over the past several months. But I think it's also important to go on the offensive, both militarily and diplomatically or strategically. And by militarily, I mean, we really have to reinstate the targeted killings of the leaders of Hamas and other terror leaders, including in Fatah, that are involved in directing these attacks. Ismail Haniyeh gave a Nasrallah-esque speech in Gaza during the 31st anniversary of Hamas marches that they had throughout the Gaza Strip, and he didn't seem at all worried about being taken out. And I think that he shouldn't be allowed to be doing this anymore. Every moment that he's alive, he's inciting and working towards waging war against Israel, and indeed waging it on multiple fronts. So I think that he and Sinwar and other leading Hamas officials should be killed. And on a more strategic level, I think that the response is not simply to approve, although it's important to approve a lot of the various communities that have been built over the years and have been undermined by radical left-wing organizations that are funded by the European Union governments to block them from developing. I think that's important, but I think more important than that is really taking the strategic move and applying Israeli law to Area C, because what we're seeing really is that aside from everything else, the Israelis who are now being targeted by these attacks in Judea and Samaria specifically are also treated like second-class citizens by the government. I mean, we are the only people, effectively, the only large number of people who are living under military government. We're not living under civilian government in Judea and Samaria. And I think that after over half a century, the time has come to allow the more than 500,000 Israeli citizens who live in Judea and Samaria to be governed by Israeli law.
And you mentioned before the community aspects and the desire by some in the Knesset to pass legislation. In fact, it's reported today by the Jerusalem Post the bill was passed that would legalize 70 so-called outposts. This passed the first round in the Ministerial Committee for Legislation, and it'll be a long journey forward before this actually gets approved into law and you actually see the legalization. But I actually, as you brought it up before, that's one potential response, but I do actually have a problem with it. I think we should just be, as you said, we shouldn't be second-class citizens. We should be allowed to build. It shouldn't have to take the murder of 2 soldiers, the murder of a baby who was born prematurely in a forced cesarean because the parents were shot, the mother was shot. I think we should be doing it anyway. I think, in my opinion, that sends the wrong message that we're only going to build when you attack us. I think that should just be policy, plain and simple.
Well, I don't think that it's wrong to say, look, stick your finger in their eye and say, you think that you're going to get rid of us here. We're expanding communities here right now because we're under military government. This is the way that you do it. And you're right, it's highly constrained and limited. And it's also not solving the basic problem here, which is that you have over 500,000 Israelis who are living under military government. And so I think that the most powerful and most powerful response, and the response will have the longest and most salutary strategic implications, is for Israel to simply say, you know what, we've had it. We're not leaving. We can't survive in the long term without at least, at a minimum, Area C under our sovereign control, and therefore we're going to apply our laws to these areas, and that's that. We're done, and now you deal with it.
At the same time, the J-Post also reports that Israel advanced a bill to exile family members of Palestinian terrorists. You have legislators who have been calling on this for a long time. Israel's never taken that step. Is this realistic? Can something like this actually be approved without, let's say, the Supreme Court getting involved in nixing this plan? I mean, I would, my gut tells me this would be actually more effective than House demolitions, which also takes months, and sometimes it only ends up being one room which is destroyed or half an apartment, all these shenanigans. I think it would be a strong message if the families of terrorists were exiled. Where would they go? I don't know. That's also something that has to be discussed. But is this realistic legislation, number one, and would this be a deterrent?
I don't want to second-guess people who put a lot of thought into this, and so I'm not going to opine on it one way or another. I think that what you're talking about, the legal difficulties of getting this passed, are the problem. And I think that if you really wanted to take an effective response to these things, it's not that you would say this or that specific action that we have to take. What you have to do, again, and this is a strategic response to terrorism, is to reform the legal system in Israel so that we remove these obstacles to military operations, whether it involves exiling, or whatever you want to call it, kicking the families out of the areas where they're operating and growing these nests of terror in their households, or any other response that may act from an operational perspective to secure the lives of Israelis in these areas from being attacked and molested. I think that the most important thing is to look at the sort of governing architecture that's put us into this place, and the governing architecture is a legal system that denies justice to Israelis and gives obscene amounts of protections to Palestinian terrorists who are using those protections, obviously, as you would expect them to do, which is to endanger Israeli security.
I just glanced at my phone. I apologize for being rude, but I just got an update that a bus with children was stoned by Arab terrorists in the Tekoa area, and these buses that travel through my area here in your area in Gush Etzion, and they're clearly marked as children's transportation vehicles. So here you have, all this terror. And by the way, a lot of the rock attacks don't get reported in the mainstream media. Sometimes if, God forbid, somebody gets hurt, it'll make the cut. But, my phone goes off all day long with updates from the different services here in Judea and Samaria, letting me know what happens. And so this morning, a bus from Tekoa attacked by rocks. Thank God, no injuries. There was damage to the bus. It was also yesterday, also near Eli, another attack where a woman was lightly wounded. So these attacks are taking place on a regular basis. People shouldn't just think that it's only the shootings. I mean, those are the worst, unfortunately. So with these attacks, you have Masa Israel Journey. This is a branch or a program through the Jewish Agency for young people, students, and whatnot, college-age students, to pick programs here where they come and get an Israel experience. And Masa came out in a letter saying that they are banning any of their program participants from visiting anywhere in Judea and Samaria, including places like Gush Etzion, Hashmonaim. They will allow participants to visit the Western Wall in the Old City only if they enter through the Jaffa Gate and I think one other gate, but they can't go further east than that and go into the Old City of Jerusalem. So we have the attacks, that's for sure, but you do have 400,000 Israelis, Jews living in these areas. What is your thought on this, I would say, pretty radical position by Masa, at least temporarily banning any of their kids from visiting communities in Judea and Samaria and parts of Jerusalem? Where does that say when you have an area under Israeli sovereignty where a recognized program by the Jewish Agency for Israel says it's too dangerous to go there? What's going on here?
Look, I think it's important. I think in a way it's good that they did this, because what they're exposing is the radicalism of Masa. I think I just discovered over the past couple of weeks through very shocking exchanges with programs and with senior people in Masa that they are an extremely radical group, and they are run by the Sochnut, the Jewish Agency, which makes it even worse. So they're getting state funding, and they are running programs that, in one program that came to Efrat for Shabbat before the thing, they had just gone through a tour of Jerusalem that was organized for them by Iramim, which is a radical anti-Israel organization that is funded by the European Union. And so they came to Efrat, and these are young people who are deeply committed to Israel, and they come with the best of intentions from all over the world, and then they're indoctrinated under Masa by anti-Zionists, which I find just shocking. And then this past weekend, they invited us to spend Shabbat with this Masa group at a retreat at Kibbutz Ramat Rachel in Jerusalem, and to have a bunch of panels about Jerusalem. And I discovered that every single person who had been invited to speak to these groups, except me, is on the far left. And so, I'm not surprised that they would take this action, because it's a hostile action, right? What they're basically saying is, we don't want to have any part of these areas, and therefore we're using this as an excuse. After all, there are terrorist attacks in Tel Aviv as well. What was the Sarona market attack? Are they going to block their participants from in exploring the nightlife of Tel Aviv? No, of course not. What about Taylor Forts? He was killed on the boardwalk in Tel Aviv by the beach. So are they not allowed to go to the beach? No. So what they're doing when they're saying, okay, you're not allowed to go to any of these areas in Judea and Samaria, you're not allowed to go to the city of David, you're not allowed to go to the Shiloach pools, you're not allowed to go to any of these places in Jerusalem. They're saying, they're making a political statement. They're not making this isn't out of an abundance of caution. This is out of an abundance of ill will. And it's shocking to me, that Masa is being mismanaged and misrun in this way, because when you think about it, and the thing that made me so unhappy in both of these recent exchanges with these programs and with these Masa officials is that you're talking about young people who take it upon themselves to spend an entire year, in most cases, of their lives in Israel to really come and contribute to this country and to see whether they want to make aliyah and live their lives here. And they're being discouraged from doing so by the Jewish agency, operational arm, Masa. And so I find the entire situation just horrible and unforgivable. And Bougie Herzog, the new Jewish agency chairman, if he's got any, patch of Zionism left in him, he should be firing all of the directors of Masa and replacing them with people who are dedicated Zionists.
Very sad here if you're using terror attacks, these deadly attacks, to further your political agenda. That's truly disappointing. Yeah, I think you're completely correct there. I think the head of the Jewish agency has to step up and do what's right here. Completely disappointing. I mean, you mentioned Serona, this and that. I wonder if they'd ban people from going to the south side of Chicago, or who knows what other neighborhoods that this is clearly political.
University of Chicago.
Yeah. So last question before we let you go, Caroline. Wave of terror. IDF is currently operating in the villages, trying to prevent the next attack. I mean, we can't say, God forbid, when that will happen. Hopefully never. What are we going to see in the days, weeks, months ahead on that front when it comes to, Hamas just celebrated their anniversary, riots, demonstrations. This morning I saw images of Arabs trying to block the IDF from demolishing the house of the Barkan terrorist. So things are tense here. Where do you think this latest wave is going to take us, if you have any insight into that?
I'm actually quite concerned, and I'm concerned also because of what's happening inside of Israel, which I think that the Arabs are always acutely aware of, which is that we're a democracy, and we're a parliamentary democracy, which means that, elections can basically be held anytime the Knesset so votes to hold them. And what you're seeing now, because elections are scheduled by law to occur no later than November of 19, that all of the parties in the coalition, and of course outside the coalition, are jockeying to get organized and set themselves up ahead of the elections, whether it's Likud or Jewish Home or Kulanu or whatever. And as a result, since they're all kind of going after the same basic voter blocks, it's much more difficult for them to work cooperatively. Just sort of inherently, it's not out of ill will or irresponsibility. It's just the nature of the beast. You're all sort of going after a lot of these overlapping constituencies. And so when you have this kind of situation, it's more difficult as a practical matter for the government to operate in a coherent fashion. You have a new chief of general staff coming in February. You have, a lot of changes in the senior ranks of the army and of the Shin Bet, and we don't have a police chief. So, I mean, all of these things are kind of coming to a head at a very problematic moment for Israeli governance. And so unfortunately, I'm afraid that we're not going to have the ability to take the sort of actions that one would require. And perhaps, maybe they also feel that they need a specific mandate from the public to come in and take the kind of strategic steps that they need to take in terms of implementing Israeli law in Area C, in terms of legal reforms in the courts and in the state prosecution, so that you're actually able to take the kind of tactical steps that you need to take to beat back and to defeat the terrorist armies that are arrayed against us.
Let's hope for quiet both here in Judea and Samaria, Jerusalem, and throughout the land of Israel. Let's hope the government has the ability and the vision to truly crack down, take some of the steps Caroline recommended at the first part of the interview about what needs to be done to stop the terror. No more Jewish victims. We say it all the time on the show, and please God, things will be quiet. Caroline Glick, senior contributing editor for the Jerusalem Post, Ma'ariv, and Breitbart. How can people get your book, by the way?
Amazon. I think that you can order it through my website, which just links to Amazon. So I think that's Amazon.com.
The Israel Solution.
The Israeli Solution.
The Israeli Solution.
Yeah, a one-state plan for peace in the Middle East.
The one and only Caroline Glick, thanks so much for joining us. And that is a wrap for today's show. If you missed any part of the program, you can always listen to it on demand on the website, landofisrael.com. You can also find it on my Facebook page, Joshua Hasten, Twitter at Josh Hasten, SoundCloud, iTunes, wherever else. And go check out all the other wonderful shows here on the Land of Israel Network. Signing out from beautiful Gush Etzion. Even, guys, listen, even with all the craziness going on, it's still another beautiful day here in the Land of Israel. There's no place I'd rather be. And that's going to do it for December 17th, 2018, the 9th of Tevet, 5779. Those fasting tomorrow on the 10th of Tevet, have a meaningful fast. Let's have a peaceful and quiet week here in Israel. Most importantly, wherever you are in the wonderful world of ours, be safe out there. Shalom, shalom from Gush Etzion, Israel. Talk to you next week.
Who are we as a people? Who are we as a nation? What does it mean to be a Jew in the land of Israel, as a Jew in Judea? What is our message to the world? We're finally back in our land, and we get to ask these questions.
Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to make Judea and Samaria an issue for the entire world, to know that the Jews have a place in the world.
Israel Inspired with Ari Abramowitz and Jeremy Gimpel on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.org.